The biggest companies in the world have had some humble beginnings. This was the office of Google when it had first started out, this was Amazon's first office, and this was the first office of Apple. This building might not seem familiar, but it was the first office of a company that was more significant than Google, Amazon, and Apple combined. It had its own currency, it even had its own army, and it ended up ruling over all of India. This is the story of the East India Company. In the 1500s, England wasn't quite the power it was soon to become. At that time, Spain and Portugal were the richest countries in Europe, with Spain having conquered territories in much of Central and South America and Portugal controlling the spice trade in the east. England, meanwhile, wasn't having much luck either conquering new territories or trading. But in 1592, the English managed to capture a Portuguese trading ship called the Madre de Dios. When the ship was brought back to England, the English couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was the largest ship ever seen in England, and its cargo consisted of chests of gold and silver coins, exotic tapestries, 425 tons of pepper, 45 tons of cloves, 35 tons of cinnamon, 3 tons of nutmeg, and other treasures. The value of its cargo was £500,000, which was half the value of the entire English treasury at that time. The amazing riches of the Madre de Dios was one of the factors that encouraged the English to begin trading with the East. On 22nd September 1599, a group of merchants met at an inn in England and decided to set up a trading company. Much like the startup investors of today, they raised some initial capital. They together pooled in £30,133, which is $4 million in today's money. And even the structure of the company was like any other company today. At the top of the hierarchy was the General Court, which comprised of all the shareholders of the company who had voting rights. The General Court in turn appointed a court of directors, which consisted of a governor, a deputy governor, and 24 directors. The court of directors oversaw 7 chief committees. Like in every company, there was a committee for accounting, and also committees for buying, correspondence, shipping, treasure, warehouse, and private trade. The East India Company also got something that modern businesses covet, a monopoly. It spent a year trying to lobby with Queen Elizabeth I and was eventually rewarded with a charter. For a period of 15 years, the company won the exclusive right to trade with all countries west of the Cape of Good Hope. With the charter ensuring that no other English company could trade in the region and serve as competition, the East India Company was ready to begin its operations. Meanwhile, what was happening half a world away in India? Akbar was ruling over the Mughal Empire, which had been founded 70 years prior. The Mughal Empire at the time extended over much of modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and north and central India. In South India, the Vijayanagara Empire had faded from significance and had been replaced by 5 Deccan sultanates. The Mughal emperors, in particular, were fabulously rich. The modern word Mughal, as in business mogul, comes from the word Mughal. Overall, this was a period of relative prosperity for India. It had a population of 150 million and accounted for 25% of the world's GDP. In comparison, England had a population of 7.5 million and accounted for 3% of the world's GDP. Meanwhile, the English East India Company was preparing its ships to set sail to the East Indies. The first few voyages weren't targeted towards India. The company first went to the Spice Islands in Indonesia. Here they managed to do some trade but found that the Dutch East India Company already had a strong presence in the region. The Dutch East India Company at the time was significantly more powerful and better funded than the English East India Company, and the English company decided to drop their plans of trading in the Spice Islands. They looked around and realized the potential of India. India was a textiles powerhouse at that time, and they decided to focus their energies here. In 1608, the first English East India Company ship landed at Surat in Gujarat. The company realized that if it were to trade successfully with the Mughals, it would need partners and permissions. For this, it would need to set up a relationship with the Mughal emperor himself. Captain William Hawkins, who was leading the voyage, disguised himself as an Afghan nobleman and took a year to reach Agra. He did manage to meet Jahangir, but Jahangir didn't seem particularly interested, and Hawkins had to eventually go back home achieving little. The company realized they'd need a word from their own emperors to be dealing with their Mughal counterparts. Queen Elizabeth had died by then, so they got King James I to send an emissary in the form of Sir Thomas Roe. Sir Thomas Roe reached India in 1615 and immediately realized it wouldn't be easy to get permissions to trade with the Mughals. When he arrived, he complained he was put up in substandard housing. Writing later, he received a room that was no bigger than an oven and had no light. He spent several months trying to meet Jahangir, but when he finally managed to do so, he realized Jahangir was less interested in trade and more interested in knowing what life was like in England. He wrote that Jahangir asked him what he drank and how much. Jahangir also asked him how beer was made and if it was possible to make beer in India. Roe complained that instead of discussing trade, Jahangir expected great presents in jewels to feed his insatiable appetite for stones, riches, and rare pieces of art. Luckily, Sir Thomas Roe had presents for the Mughal emperor. He'd brought with him English mastiffs and Irish greyhounds, an English stagecoach, some mannerist paintings, and many crates of red wine which Jahangir was known to be fond of. After 3 long years, Sir Thomas Roe was finally able to convince Jahangir to give him what he wanted: permissions to set up a factory in Surat and trade with the Mughals. For Jahangir, the event didn't signify much. He didn't even mention it in his official records, unlike Sir Thomas Roe, who was documenting his entire experience with the Mughal emperor. But the trade permissions were significant. They would change the history of both England and India forever. To learn how the East India Company eventually came to rule over all of India, subscribe to our channel. We'll be uploading the rest of the story in the coming days.